FSN.
Right.
So it's a good time for them to kind of play better, you know, and hopefully win some games here, you know?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. You have, so Timberwolves break their huge streak of no playoffs. And then, though the Wild have not looked good in the playoffs, they made the playoffs.
They did, yeah.
You've got Minnesota, who I believe is a half game out of first
Something
this
like that.
week,
Yeah.
or today, I should say.
Yeah.
And, they're picked to go to the playoffs.
Yeah.
At least I think I saw ESPN.
Yeah, they're kind of on the verge. Yeah.
So it's like you have this and the Vikings made it to the playoffs.
Yeah.
And you have sports fans in Minnesota are kind of like, wow, we've had all our teams are doing well.
Yes, exactly. Except for the
So let's use that because the Lynx are gonna do well.
Yeah, they won a championship.
Yeah. And so you have this momentum going. So the team just needs to step up because I think they have the pieces. Defense, which we talk about literally every podcast, it's a broken record, and I'm going to mention it again.
It's brutal.
Is questionable. The offense is getting those pieces together, and they've looked good all season. The offense really has. And so they need to just do it. I mean, if they could get to the playoffs, I guarantee we'd have every single sport.
We would.
Professional sport in Minnesota reaching the playoffs.
And that's United really doesn't have to compete with any other teams other than the Twins during the summertime.
Right.
Which is nice for them. The Wild and the Timberwolves have to compete with each other.
Yep.
And then compete with the Vikings at the end of the Vikings halfway through the season. The United just have to compete with the Twins. And the United are only playing one game a week, maybe 2 games a week.
Right.
So to get fans to be into it, you really don't have to be that involved. I mean, you watch 1 or 2 games a week, and that's it. Twins play all week, So they have a great opportunity to get a huge fan base here. Yeah. And it's great that they sold out that first year at the new stadium, but I want to see sellouts going for the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Right.
And if we get to – because the Twins sold out the first, I think, 1 or 2 years at Target Field. But then after that, it was no more sellouts.
Yeah.
And so if the United can do that, if they can go to year 2, 3, 4, 5, we're going to have a lot of money to spend on guys.
Right.
It'll be great for
us.
And
and that gets to one of my points that I wanted to bring up about trusting the process. So anybody that's NFL fans that have been paying attention to the Packers at all, obviously this is a Minnesota podcast, so that might be few and far between.
I'm just going to stop Dave right there. Dave is a Packer fan. I am a Vikings fan. We're not going to argue about Packers versus Vikings on this podcast at all. Dave's going to make a point about Aaron Rodgers. That's it. This isn't a Packer podcast. This is a Vikings podcast, okay?
And on top of that, the point that I'm going to make, I'm tying it into the Minnesota United.
Okay, well, go ahead.
So the past few weeks, Rodgers has been getting hit pretty hard in the media about supposedly being against the team moves, specifically in coaching, but then also letting Jordy Nelson go.
That was a huge blow for him, though.
Yeah, and the media's been blowing it up, saying that Rodgers is considering leaving Green Bay, and
not gonna happen.
Finally, Rodgers came out this week and said, "Look, the media is trying to make a story wherever they can." And I trust the process of what's happening. I mean, they went through a whole overhaul this offseason, and he says he trusts the process. So with that in mind, we've had this discussion on, I think, almost every podcast we've done.
Pretty much, yeah.
Trusting the process with Minnesota United is difficult.
Very.
At the same time, we've already mentioned how Quintero clearly fits a part, maybe the part. And we've also mentioned how it seems like they're getting those pieces in place.
Yes.
But I was sitting at work on Friday in a little lull, and I was kind of thinking through the roster signings this year. And so I look at this and I say, I don't know that they do have a process in place. We have 2 Cameroonians that we signed. We've talked a little bit about them. And so Akoo is a center back. And we signed him 3 weeks after we signed his compatriot, Pangop. Akoo hasn't seen any minutes yet.
Nope.
And in fact, last week I saw a couple articles. I don't know if they were necessarily citing sources inside Minnesota. But it sounds like they're going to be he's going to be shipped out on loan.
Okay.
So I was like, well, why did we sign him? I mean, if we look at the center backs, we have Francisco Calvo, Brent Kelman, Michael Boxall, and Wyatt Olmsberg. We have 4 center backs.
Yes.
Olmsberg has gotten minutes only because of international duty for Boxall and Calvo. And Kalman's gotten minutes only because of international duty.
Yes.
So we have 2 CBs on the roster that get minutes only because
of international
something
duty.
else.
Yeah.
And then we go ahead and sign another CB that we know we're just going to send out on loan. And to me, it's like, I get it. He's only 24.
Well, yeah.
So there's an upside.
There's an upside to him, yes.
But at the same time, couldn't that money have been spent somewhere else?
Could have been, yes.
You're right. Now, of course, he's going on a loan, so the theory is that team is going to cover at least a significant portion of his contract.
And he'll get minutes.
Right. But it's still like, we could have signed a holding midfielder.
Yeah. We
could have signed a right back or a left back. And we didn't. We signed a center back. So then I was like, well, it's fair because you can see the upside. You look at Pangop. So he's a left winger. We've already discussed that about
we have 20
a million
of them.
times.
We have 20 of them.
And he's seen minutes against New York Red Bull.
Yes, he did.
Again, it probably had a lot to do with we looked terrible.
It was a bad game.
And we just needed something.
Yeah.
The fact that they brought him on probably didn't say a whole lot about
the
fact that he was needed. We need an option of some kind.
We did.
So those are the only minutes he's had.
Yeah.
And I don't foresee now with Quintero probably pushing Ibarra to the left. Sam Nicholson and Ibarra are going to be going back and forth to the left wing. I don't see a reason for Pangop to exist. So maybe he's going to go out on loan.
Probably.
And so it's like, well, again, the grand scheme of things, 20 wingers to begin with, why are we making these moves? So then that's another thing.
Yeah.
So then I go on to Maximiano. I did not know this until this week, that he had an ACL tear last year. I knew that. But I did not know that he's still rehabbing.
Really?
So we signed a guy that can't even play.
How old is he? Is he in his 20s?
Early 20s.
Wow, okay. Yeah.
And to me, I was like, wait, so if he hasn't played since June when he tore his ACL, that means our scouts never actually saw him play. They've only seen video.
Yes, that's right.
So they just picked up this guy. They made a big deal of it. In fact, they probably made a bigger deal of him than they did Quintero.
Yeah.
And he hasn't played since June. He can't play.
Yeah.
He finally went back to full training this week. And so getting back to that, trusting the process, when I learned this, I kind of started every single time I saw a post on Twitter, I tried to reach out. I would respond to the poster, who is generally some media person.
Sure.
To see if they could answer the question, did we know that he couldn't play when we signed him?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the team did, but did they ever disclose that to the media? I couldn't find anything anywhere that it was ever released in the media that he couldn't play.
Sure.
So I was like, did we know this? Did I miss it? Did we know this? And no one's ever responded to me. So I'm starting to think that we didn't notice it. And that the team just didn't tell us.
We had to. The team had to. No.
Well, I think the team did.
The team knew.
But I think they chose not to tell anyone, which makes me say, well, how can you trust a process
if you don't tell anybody?
If they're not being forthright with us?
Well, that kind of reminds me of the Twins signing Luis Severino this year. They signed Severino, and he is injured. I think he's Tommy John surgery. He's done this year. But they signed him to a 2-year contract. I think it was like $5 million a year. So he's going to make $5 million this year, but he's going to make $5 million next year. And they're hoping that he comes back and is good next year after that injury happens. And the Twins let everybody know when they signed him, like, hey, we know he's not going to play this year. Right. But we're hoping that next year he will have some spot in the rotation or the bullpen or whatever. And he's a good pitcher.
Right.
And the only reason people didn't sign him is because he's injured.
Right.
So if that's the case, that the United decided to sign this guy because they knew he was injured and nobody else wanted to sign him, but they thought maybe when he comes back, he's going to be fantastic. It's interesting that they wouldn't have said that when they signed him.
And, and again, I should also clarify, it's a loan.
Yeah.
So it's not like we're tied to this player.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Andy Greeter, he writes for TwinCities.com, which I think is Pioneer Press, isn't it?
Pioneer Press, yeah.
And he had put out an article, and he's the last person I reached out to, actually. He had put out an article 3 weeks ago, I think, 2 weeks ago, about how none of our loan deals have panned out.
Yeah.
And so he went through all of them. And he made a point that, Maximiano is a loan. We don't know what he's going to bring to us yet. And it was intriguing because I actually responded to him on Twitter, and I pointed out that article. And I said, even this article, you didn't mention that he couldn't play.
Yeah.
So I'm like, did we not know that he was injured? And for me, I know loans are generally kind of those, you're testing the waters.
Pretty much, yeah.
You need a position, specifically his, because he's a holding mid. And you're not sure you want to fork out the money, so they'll let him go on the cheap. We'll cover his fees, and that's it. But at the same time, you're spending money on a guy. Now, like the Twins, $5 million. Obviously, that's not what we're talking about here.
No.
But you're still spending money on the guy that could go somewhere else.
Could.
And being an ACL, that's a bad injury.
Well, it's a terrible injury for a soccer player.
Yeah. So, and especially playing on AstroTurf. I guess it's not Field Turf.
Field Turf. Yeah.
And so he's at risk for the rest of his life.
Yes.
He's at risk for sure this season.
Oh, yeah.
And it just seems a little weird. It's hard to trust the process when you have a signing like that. Next point. Francisco Kelvin. He's our captain.
Yes.
He's captain of Costa Rica. Guy's a good player. He's our center back. He doesn't play center back for Costa Rica. He didn't play center back at Saprissa. He played left back. We need a left back.
Yes.
We don't need a center back.
No.
Theoretically. Obviously, Olmsberg is young. Kelman's product of NASL. Still, we don't technically need a center back. But we do need a fullback. The guy, Francisco Calvo, is fantastic on the ball. He's got ball skills that most defenders don't have.
Yes.
And he's quick, he's smart, but he makes some egregious mistakes in defense.
Yes, he does.
Because he's not playing a role he's supposed to be playing. And so, because we have Tyrone Mears, who's injured, because Jerome Tiasson is just now healthy after a few weeks of not being, because Carter Manley is a rookie, because Mark Birch is quote-unquote injured.
And terrible.
People asked Adrian Heath this week, could we see Francisco Calvo move to the left? And he said, no, I'm comfortable with this pairing in center back. I want to build on this.
All right.
And it's just...
But maybe he sees Calvo with somebody who can grow into that role.
Well, right. But at the same time, we need a left back.
We do, but maybe he's...
Now, when Gomez comes back, we won't need it, or comes in, we won't need a left back.
But maybe he says, okay, well, Calvo at his position right now does the team a better service at this position than he does at left back.
It's possible.
I mean,
he's a coach. He's the manager. He obviously knows more than we do.
He knows more than I do. I mean,
but it's still one of those things where it's difficult to trust the process.
Yeah.
When you, as an individual, as a fan, who is already going to be irrational to begin with. I'm willing to admit I'm irrational sometimes.
Yes.
Sometimes.
Most of the time.
But it's like we have expectations. We see what's on paper. We see video. I mean, we can watch just as much tape as
anybody
any coach can.
Yeah.
For the most part. Nowadays. And it's hard to trust the process when we have as much information as we do. And we see these mistakes. which maybe we should shift to the Portland game. And we see these mistakes